history gets way stranger than your textbook. Some wars ended before breakfast. Some empires wore the wrong name for centuries. Some queens stood closer to astronauts than pyramid builders. Some revolutions changed the world and still got sidelined. Some Vikings reached America and somehow became a classroom footnote. One king spent so much gold he rattled an economy. One tower survived because it turned into a giant antenna. One city burned, and the biggest myth about it still refuses to die. One university was already teaching while another empire did not exist yet. And one secret wartime machine was powered mostly by women. By the end, regular history class is going to feel weirdly incomplete. Number 10 is the Anglo-Zanzibar War, still recognized as the shortest recorded war in history. It erupted on August 27, 1896, after a succession fight over who would rule the Sultanate. Prince Khalid seized the palace and ignored a British ultimatum demanding that he step aside. At exactly 9 a.m, British warships opened fire on the Sultan's waterfront palace there. The conflict lasted no longer than 40 minutes before Khalid's side was completely crushed there. One British sailor was seriously wounded while Zanzibar suffered hundreds of casualties in an astonishingly lopsided battle. So yes, a war really began and ended faster than most people finish making coffee. And if that messed with your time scale, the next fact bends history into an even stranger shape. Number 9 sounds fake, but Oxford was teaching students before the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan even existed. Oxford's official history says teaching existed there in some form as early as 1096 already. Britannica places Tenochtitlan's founding around 1325, more than 2 centuries after Oxford had already started teaching. That means scholars were arguing in chilly stone halls while the future Aztec capital was still unborn. History class often makes civilizations feel neatly lined up, like everyone took turns on one giant stage. Real history overlaps wildly, which is why this fact hits your brain like a trapdoor opening. Suddenly medieval students, eagle emblems, and lake cities all belong to the same messy human timeline. And that overlap matters, because our next fact makes ancient Egypt feel even more suspiciously close. Number 8 is Cleopatra, who lived so late that the pyramids were already ancient landmarks to her. Cleopatra was born in 70 BCE, while the Great Pyramid was finished in the early 25th century BCE. So, when she looked at Egypt's oldest wonders, she was staring at monuments, already older than many empires. That is why historians love pointing out that she stood closer to the moon landing than pyramid construction. Your brain wants all ancient Egypt compressed into one blurry era, but the timeline refuses to cooperate. The pyramids were old even to Cleopatra, which makes Egypt feel less like one chapter and more like layers. Here's the wild part. People separated by thousands of years still get packed into one tiny textbook spread. And speaking of famous firsts, the next one lands on a shore Columbus never reached first. Number 7 is that Norse explorers reached North America around 1,000 years ago, centuries before Columbus. Parts Canada describes L. Ants ox meadows as the first known evidence of European presence in the Americas. On Newfoundland's northern tip, archaeologists found the remains of a small Norse encampment built with timber and sod. That site is not legend or vibes or wishful thinking. It is physical evidence sitting in the ground. It does not make Columbus irrelevant, but it absolutely destroys the old idea that he was first. History gets cleaner in school than it ever was in real life, and this is perfect proof. But wait, because our next traveler did not just carry wealth, he carried enough gold to shake markets. And once you see that caravan, every cartoon version of medieval Africa starts looking painfully small. Number 6 is Mansa Musa, ruler of Mali, whose 1324 pilgrimage advertised his empire's staggering wealth. Britannica says his caravan included 60,000 men, a personal retinue of 12,000 enslaved people, and 80 camels. Each camel reportedly carried 300 pounds of gold, which is such a ridiculous sentence that it barely feels real. When Musa passed through Cairo, he spent and distributed so much gold that its value dropped sharply. Britannica notes the market still had not fully recovered even 12 years after his visit. That is not just rich person behavior. That is accidentally changing another city's economy by existing loudly. And because world history often centers the same few places, stories like Musa's get treated like bonus material. The next fact keeps that same theme going, because even the name Byzantine is a modern label. Number 5 is that the people we call Byzantines did not call themselves Byzantines at all. Britannica says they saw their state as the Roman Empire and called themselves Romaeoi, or Romans. In their minds, Rome had not vanished eastward, it had continued, transformed, and survived for centuries. That means when Constantinople fell in 1453, it was not some random side empire disappearing. It was the end of a state whose citizens believed they were still part of Rome. Tiny naming choices can hide huge stories, and textbooks do this kind of disappearing act all the time. And if names can rewrite memory, the next revolution shows how entire victories can get pushed to the edge. This is where history gets slippery, because the label changed and millions of Romans quietly vanished from popular memory. Number 4 is the Haitian Revolution, one of the most world-changing uprisings ever, and one of the least emphasized. The U.S. State Department notes it created the second independent country in the Americas after the United States. It began in 1791 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue and became a long, brutal struggle for freedom. Enslaved people rose up, outside empires intervened, and the conflict eventually helped destroy French control. Haiti declared independence in 1804, creating a new state born from a successful slave revolt. That should make it a centerpiece of world history, not an afterthought tucked beside bigger European stories. And this is where it gets ridiculous. A revolution that reshaped the Atlantic still gets shockingly little classroom time. Our next fact is smaller on paper, but it shows how myths can outlive the event itself. Number 3 is not the fire itself, but the myth that the Great Fire of London ended plague. London's museum says that famous story is not true, even though people repeat it constantly. Deaths from plague were already falling before the fire, which broke out in September 1666. Several areas hit hardest by the plague were not even destroyed by the flames there. People also continued dying from plague after the fire, so the neat cause and effect story falls apart. The myth survived because humans love a tidy ending, especially after a disaster that already feels cinematic. But history is rude like that. It keeps refusing the satisfying version and handing you the messier one. And speaking of things that almost disappeared, the next icon survives because it became unexpectedly useful. Number 2 is the Eiffel Tower, which was never supposed to become Paris's permanent sky roommate. The official Eiffel Tower site says Gustave Eiffel only had a 20-year permit after the 1889 exposition. By 1910, the structure could have been dismantled and handed fully back to the city. What saved it was wireless telegraphy, because the tower turned out to be an excellent giant antenna. A permanent radio station was installed, military interest grew, and its strategic value became impossible to ignore. The site says signals reached 6,000 kilometers by 1908, just before demolition would have become likely. Later, intercepted wartime messages proved the tower mattered for far more than postcards and romance shots. And now for the last one, which quietly changes who you picture when you hear code breaking. Number 1 is Bletchley Park, where the code breaking story is far bigger than the handful of famous men. Bletchley Park says that by 1945, 75% of the staff working there were women. The official site calls women the backbone of the operation, which is a sentence more people should know. Many came from universities, civil service posts, and women's military branches, then spent years keeping their work secret. So when people picture wartime code breaking as one genius and one machine, the image is far too small. History is full of hidden crowds, and this list barely scratches how many got edited out. If one of these facts completely rewired your brain, that is exactly why digging past the school version is fun. And if you want more true history that sounds made up, there is a whole rabbit hole waiting. Drop into the next video whenever you want your timeline broken again, because we have barely started. Thanks for hanging out, and keep this list handy for the next time someone says history is boring.